Hey everyone, Amia here from Resonance Astrology and welcome to my channel. And if you're new here, hi, welcome to my channel. So lovely that you found your way here. Before I start off my videos, I just briefly want to mention that I am an ancient Hellenistic astrologer and I mainly focus on ancient Hellenistic astrology, but I do blend in a mix of modern psychological astrology. And I think this will definitely also be visible in today's video as we are going to focus a bit more on the mythological side of things and definitely also going to put up some psychological aspects of deep analytical psychology into our video. And I have been thinking for a while, what exactly do I want to say about the Virgo Lunar Eclipse and the Venus Retrograde Cycle? Because from a archetypal perspective, the story and the myth of Persephone is deeply linked to Venus Retrograde Cycle. And now that we have the Virgo Lunar Eclipse, it just feels even more potent, even more prominent, since, first of all, the ruler Mercury just had a conjunction with Venus. They are both always deeply connected in the story, and it's no coincidence that Hermes, which symbolizes Mercury, is also the one that went down into the underworld to get Persephone back up or handle out a deal. So both of them are very interlinked with each other. And Persephone obviously symbolizing Venus, so to say. And before the myth of Persephone, we also kind of had the myth of Inanna and Ishtar. So I will also be going into that story a bit because they're very similar. You could almost say that Ishtar Inanna is kind of like the predecessor of Persephone, but a lot of people just know Persephone's myth. And I think also in a kind of unjustly way, I definitely want to shine more light onto the positive aspects of the story and really put the goddess of the underworld, but also the lovely goddess of spring, Persephone, into this beautiful, very empowered light. Like, this is actually really what I want to do with this video. And we're also going to do a bit of reading today. It's going to be a long form content video. I love doing long form content videos. So this is the type of video where you can either put me in your pocket and go out for a walk and listen to me while I speak. You don't really have to watch the video. Of course you can if you want to, or you can put me in the background while you make yourself some tea and just relax while we go down into the underworld and the myth of Persephone. Before we start though, I do briefly want to mention I'm going to title this video Virgo Eclipse plus Venus Retrograde and the Myth of Persephone, but I might change the title later on to just Venus Retrograde because it is linked to that cycle, just so maybe people can watch it even after the eclipse has passed because I'm not sure what the outreach will be. This video is a more spontaneous video that arose within me, so I'm posting it very near to the eclipse. It's not the best. I would obviously have preferred to have posted it a bit sooner, but this is what I'm working with here, so bear with me. In case you're watching this afterwards and I renamed it just Venus Retrograde or something like that, then just so you know why I'm also talking about the lunar eclipse here in Virgo a bit, because I am also linking it to the Virgo lunar eclipse and it's gonna make a lot of sense why I'm doing so. So the first book we will read from is Seductress, Women Who Ravished the World and Their Lost Art of Love by Betsy Prioleau. I'm not sure. I don't know if she's French, but I'm pretty sure that last name is a French last name and you would pronounce it Prioleau instead of Prioleau. So anyhow, tell me if I said it wrong. I will gladly change it. But pretty sure it's pronounced Prioleau. And here we're going to talk about Inana and Ishtar because I definitely want to first bring it back to like because the myth of Persephone really kind of originated from Inana and Ishtar and it's very similar. So we're going to read here from this book first. So I'm going to like read a few bits and pieces. We're not going to read the whole chapter because I think this is going to take up a bit too much time, more time than I would wish for. So I'm going to go over the bits and pieces that I think are important, and I'm probably going to pause and then talk about a few other things that I think are very much linked to the astrology right now, because we're going to bridge these two together. Inanna, goddess of sexual allure and desire, was the supernova of Near Eastern deities. She originated in summer during the 4th millennium BC and renamed Ishtar by the Babylonians, held sway for 4,000 years. This time written records authenticate her stature and the scope of her sovereignty. Although Inanna shared her power with a tribune of ruler gods, she outranked and outfoxed them all. She cut a formidable figure. Wearing a towering horned headdress, flounced skirt, lapis lazuli jewelries, and a zodiac-tooled belt, she stands with one foot on a lion and carries a staff of intertwined serpents. Wings tipped with buds and maces flare from her shoulders above her shins, Sirius, the shape-shifting dog of the great goddess. Despite the goddess's role reduction to the sphere of sexuality, Inanna retained the cosmic authority of the prehistoric deities. Like them, she was the totality of what is, the lady of blazing dominion, who contained multitudes and contradictions and presided over life, death, and regeneration. Her numerous names reflect her myriad aspects: Queen of Heaven, Great Mother Cow, Princely Inanna, Lady of Vegetation, First Snake, First Daughter of the Moon, Lady of Raging Battle, and Bearer of Happiness. But her defining quality was her prodigal, hot-bodied female sexuality. She incarnated raw erotic desire beyond societal laws and human control. She is known as mythology's ultimate femme fatale. She thumbed her nose at proper femininity and walked on the wild side, snaking men and slaking her ferocious sexual appetite. But she was really the seductress, writ large and at large. In a society that subordinated women to their husbands and punished female adultery with death by the iron dagger, Inanna represented the principle of female sexual empowerment. Then there's a brief part I'm going to skip. Inanna not only violated social norms, she transcended gender divisions, perpetuating the twin-sex nature of the archaic goddess. She had Lala, the vigor of a young man in his prime, and enjoyed masculine pursuits, warfare and liaisons. Not sure if I said that word right. With women, if she wished. Nothing, no cultural constraints could curb Inanna's all-inclusive runaway carnality. She changed men into women and the reverse at her pleasure, confusing the sexes and casting the ancient spell of the androgyny, the promise of gender fusion and completeness. Devotees cross-dressed at her rituals with women in the male robes of power and men in brooch-pinned gowns. So let's stop here just for a brief second. I think it's so fascinating that she was also known to violate the societal norms and also transcended gender divisions, because that is something that is very much linked to Mercury, the planet Mercury, because the planet Mercury is also the planet to not really belong anywhere. Mercury doesn't have a sect. Mercury is always the odd one out and always kind of represents both. And here in this story, we can just so clearly see that things like gender divisions have just been part of our society for so long, you know? So let's just leave it at that. And I think this is also an important aspect, because right now we have Venus retrograde, obviously, and Venus is retrograde in the sign of Aries, which is ruled by Mars in Cancer. Both of them are not in a good position, and Mars in Cancer is known to be very much linked to women fighting for women's rights, reproductive rights, and Venus in Aries is much like about myself and taking back my control to myself. So there, I think, is a big rise of especially women currently taking back their power over their own sexuality and their reproductive rights and how they want to be in the world as women. So I think there's no coincidence that I think the story of Inanna and the Underworld is very much present in the global sphere right now, and I think maybe even more present for women. So let me know how you're feeling this. If you're a woman, please leave me a comment down below and let me know, because the story has definitely also been coming up in my life, as I'm currently really getting in touch with the priestess archetype. And the priestess is definitely also someone that rules over the underworld and our dark aspects. And it is always this reminder that when we face our darkness, actually we can really step into our light. But we people are always so afraid. We're afraid of our power. We're afraid of facing the darkness. We're afraid of the transformation that comes with it. And it's only natural, okay? Like, it's natural that we are like that. But this time around, we are really getting invited to do so, especially under the Venus retrograde as well, because Venus is also going through her journey in the underworld. So it's like, we should probably do the same thing and honor this archetypal journey inside of ourselves during this time. And to get back to the book, I'm skipping some parts a bit too, but I like this part here a lot because it brings us right back to Mercury as well. It literally says so in the first sentence, you're gonna see. Inanna's mercurial, complex nature resulted not from her instability, but from her supernal wholeness and maturity. To underscore the point, the Sumerians constructed a myth of her passage to ultimate adulthood. During her ordeal, she descended in classic heroic fashion to the underworld, where she was stripped of her robes and breastplate emblazoned, "Come, man, come," hung on a hook and left for dead like a piece of rotting meat. At the end of 3 days, the gods came to her rescue. She arose, rid herself of her demons, and resumed her reign with redoubled authority. Isn't this kind of insane if you think about it? It's really... What we see here in this part of the story is the literal manifestation of purposefully going and putting oneself into the underworld to go through this process to come out stronger. There is something to be said about struggles, and that struggles are a part of our life and something that ultimately is here to make us stronger. And we need these passageways. The underworld is such a prominent place. And to link it back to Virgo, so I think this is a very interesting part to link it to the myth of Virgo, essentially, because Virgo is the Virgin, right? And I think both Virgo and Gemini, the other Mercury-ruled sign, kind of tend to get a bit misrepresented here at how dark they can actually be. And we tend to forget that both of these signs come in, at least the northern hemisphere, right before the sun starts getting darker. So the Gemini season is right before the summer solstice, which is when the sun essentially starts to descend and we enter the dark of the light half of the year. And then Virgo is right before autumn equinox, when the sun literally goes into the underworld and the days officially start getting shorter and we enter the dark of the dark part of the year. So Virgo is very much linked to much more darkness than we give Virgo credit for. And this is also why Mercury, the sign Mercury, is not only the home sign of Virgo, but also the exaltation of Virgo, because during these times, it is also harvest season, so it's a time of preparing. We need to prepare well so we can go into the underworld. And this is kind of also why Venus doesn't do well there. Venus has its fall in the sign of Virgo, and Venus doesn't do well there because when we are in preparation mode and we need to think a lot, there isn't a lot of time for beauty. When we are in our heads, it's extremely difficult to get sensual and erotic. But I also think, we really have to look at astrology from a male perspective too, because for a long time it was a male-dominated field, and it makes sense that astrologers would put Venus in the sign of Virgo, which is a more difficult place, in its fall. And I think it's really also because of this myth of Persephone, because of course people don't like, especially men, don't really like that myth of the goddess that can be the queen of the underworld and at the same time also be the embodiment of spring and beauty. So it's, I think, very hard for people to comprehend how both can be true. And I think it almost gives it a bit of, I think like it's almost a bit unjustified to say just, oh yeah, Venus doesn't do well in the sign of Virgo. It's such a powerful placement, but it definitely has something to do with the underworld and kind of the underdog energy, which a lot of planets in fall or detriment have. They kind of need to ascend to the underworld. And in the planet Venus, it just is very much linked to this myth of Persephone. And when Persephone gets raped into the underworld, what happens there is a loss of innocence. And I see this a lot in the sign of Virgo in an archetypal form, but also in ourselves, in our Virgo placements that we have. A lot of Virgo placements grapple with what happens when we lose our innocence. Who do we become when we lose our innocence, especially if that happens at a young age or prematurely, which sadly happens a lot of times. And I think there's also something to be said about curiosity, because Mercury is always a very curious planet. But there's also this saying, curiosity killed the cat. So it's like, what happens if we get a bit too curious and we perhaps see things we shouldn't have seen, experience things we shouldn't have experienced? So Virgo really grapples not only with like the virginity of life and this pure untouched nature, it's also what happens to us when we get stripped of that. Who do we become when our innocence gets stripped away from us? What does that do to us? And in Persephone's part of the myth, Demeter, her mother, goes and searches for her 9 days straight or something like that. And I think from a more psychological perspective, if we look at both of these archetypes in a way that both of them are part of our psyche, so Persephone and Demeter are both part of our psyche. Often what happens when we get stripped of innocence too soon, there is some part of our soul that wants to desperately retrieve that part back. But we can't. Once we have seen the underworld, once we have gone there, everything changes. And we know that. There are experiences of life where we just know, I will not be the same person after this anymore. And Demeter is kind of that part in ourselves that desperately wants to protect that part and retrieve that part. And then I also think the part of Persephone's myth where she is in the underworld and then she eats this pomegranate, right? Which I think is part of that curiosity story. But I also find there's a version of the myth essentially where Persephone falls in love with Hades essentially, and she's like, yeah, I really want to be in the underworld, but then she doesn't want to disappoint her mom, so to say. So to make it look like she has to stay in the underworld, Hades is like, oh, well, eat a pomegranate seed and then you'll basically be forced to stay in the underworld, and we're just gonna like use it as a cover-up story. So I kind of think the myth in this way is much more enjoyable. I like that part because there is something that happens when we confront our darkness. We get much more powerful when instead of running away from our shadows, we decide to befriend our shadows and work together with them. And I think Demeter just really symbolizes this kind of caring archetype of the mother that we also all have in ourselves, that wants the best for us and that would love to protect us at all times. But life is not about protection. If we are constantly protected, there is no growth. We have to undergo these initiatory processes of being raped into the underworld. And I don't mean that in a literal way, obviously. There's many ritualistic forms where we can do such things, but so often what happens, and people that have been in psychotherapy or have studied in-depth psychotherapy, people like Carl Jung, that are really a fan of facing your shadows, know that if you don't create ritual spaces for yourself to undergo these processes, life will create them for you. And you will basically be forced to undergo these painful processes. But if we try to put these processes in a container and we decide to give ourselves a ritual to go into the underworld, just as Ishtar did in the story, obviously you don't have to do that in such a way that she did it, but it can be in a simple way of deciding to basically take a few days off. Here it's 3 days, right? She's in the underworld 3 days. So taking 3 days off and like kind of not being on social media, not really engaging people, and really sitting down, meditating more, creating a ritualistic space for Venus and praying to the goddess and letting yourself go through the underworld, really vouching to go and feel these emotions that you constantly run away from in your body, because Virgo is head heavy energy. Virgo likes to analyze and can analyze amazingly well, but this can kind of be our downfall right now, because Virgo, all Mercury signs in a way, and if you have any planets in Mercury ruled signs, especially the moon, then it's so easy for you to essentially intellectualize your emotions, and you can probably talk wonderful about your emotions without feeling them. Feeling emotions is a foreign word for especially Mercury ruled moons, and it's something that Virgo really needs to learn to do. It doesn't come natural to them, okay? Virgo is amazingly good for planning and prepping, not really good for being in a more in the flow state and embodying this erotic flow state nature in oneself and letting the emotions be the guide. No, that does not come home or easy to the sign of Virgo. It comes much more natural to the opposing sign of Virgo, where Venus is exalted in the sign of Pisces. And this is also a South Node eclipse, so it's kind of really forcing us, you could say, to let go of these behaviors that are overly perfectionistic, overly analytical, and kind of really lean into that nature anymore. And when we get thrust into the underworld, it's not a time to overthink things. It's a time to be present, okay? And that's interesting because time works completely differently in the underworld. Time doesn't exist here the way we know it in the upper world. And I think with this, we can start reading from one of my all-time faves, The Dream and the Underworld by James Hillman. He is such a great psychoanalyst, and I really, really appreciate his work, especially because it's a bit more provocative on the side, and I have never read any book on dream analysis quite as this book. It's really kind of also provoking the question of, do we really need to analyze our dreams, or should we just let dreams kind of be dreams? And kind of the core question of this, I don't know if it's the core question, but essentially the gist of this book is really about how the underworld exists as a realm itself, and the more we try to disturb it and make use of it in the upper world and make sense of it in the upper world, which is something like, again, analyzing our dreams, it's like, I'm not sure how far we will go with this. Like, is it really useful? Because a lot of us have this hero complex, and especially here in the upper world, we all have these hero stories of like, oh yeah, like we just have to go out after this purpose, and once we reach this purpose, we're gonna be the hero, and we have to overcome and evolve and evolve. And this book is really kind of like, do we? Is that really the purpose? Like, is that really the purpose of our lives? Do we have to constantly overcome and achieve and become some sort of hero in our lives? Probably not really. And what would it mean if we kind of sit and embrace the underworld and not try to overcome this underworld? Because there is this narrative in our society, especially here in the Western society, that we have to constantly overcome our shadows and face our shadows, and then we grow stronger and we become light warriors or whatever. And it's like, do we really have to become light warriors? Is that always the point of the story? Is the point of facing our shadows really only to become more bright, to become a hero? What if heroicness is found at embracing the shadow and letting us become the shadow, and also seeing that as part of the heroic journey? What if we put Hades as a heroic archetype to embody and be with? What if Persephone is a heroic archetype to be the queen of the underworld? Can we be the queen of the underworld here as well and let it be something acceptable by society? Or will society always just deem the other part of Persephone's story as valid, where she's not in the underworld and she gets sent up to be the goddess of spring? Like, is she only valuable when she is the goddess of spring and she's part of the upper world 2/3 of the year where nature blooms? Is that the only value she has? And when we celebrate her and we get so sad when she's down in the underworld? Like, really? I'm like, this part is also so important. The descent is also equally important to be with. And that's why I think also Libra as a sign is very much misunderstood, because that's exactly the beautiful part. That's why Libra rules over the autumn equinox, when we enter the dark part of the year. And why Venus and Saturn do extremely well in the sign of Libra. Libra is the only sign where a benefic planet and a malefic planet do both well in this sign. And Libra is so much about the beauty of death and decay. And what we see also what happens in nature in the northern hemisphere is the leaves start falling. And then in Scorpio season, we have like the composting process. But really, Libra is so much about the beauty of death and decay, and why Persephone's story is also so beautiful when she is in the underworld. And she is the queen of the underworld. So anyhow, we're going to read now to close this off from this book. And this book obviously has a bit more to do with dreams, but I love this book. There's so many wisdoms in this book, so I'm going to read the part that has to do with Persephone. The intervention of Hades turns the world upside down. The point of view of life ceases. Now phenomena are seen not only through the eyes of Eros and human life and love, but also through Thanatos, their cold, unmoving depths unconnected to life. By turning matters upside down in this way, we participate in Hades' rape, which is, let us remember, not just psychopathy, but a central initiatory mystery in the Eleusis myths. This rape threatens the intact psychological system that takes its strength from life, holding to human relationships and the natural ways of Demeter's daughter. This is what I mentioned before. Demeter is the archetype of this overprotective mother, and then Persephone is kind of like the curiosity kills the cat type of archetype, where we essentially are curious and then we see too much things happen to us and we get taken down into the underworld. Not in our free will, but yeah. Rape moves the Persephone soul from the being of Demeter's daughter to the being of Hades' wife, from the natural being of generation, what is given to a daughter by mothering life, to the psychic being of marriage with what is alien, different, and is not given. And it's really this marriage, actually, like the marriage of both of these aspects that kind of make us whole. The experience of the underworld is overwhelming and must be made. This style of the underworld experience is overwhelming. It comes as violation, dragging one out of life and into the kingdom of that the Orphic hymn to Pluto describes as void of day. So it often says on Greek epitaphs that entering Hades is leaving the sweet sunlight. So again, you can see it here. It's not meant to be a pleasant journey. This is not a pleasant journey, and yet it's such an important journey for ourselves to go through. The archetypal psychology of the Hades-Persephone-Demeter triangle did not cease in Greece. Aspects of the psychological mystery of Eleusis still takes place in the soul today. The Persephone experience occurs to us each in sudden depressions when we feel ourselves caught in hatefulness, cold, numbed, and drawn downwards out of life by a force we cannot see, against which we would flee, distractedly thrashing about for naturalistic explanations and comforts for what is happening so darkly. We feel invaded from below, assaulted, and we think of death. And see, this is again where Virgo struggles. Virgo would analyze all of this so deeply, and it's like we cannot analyze here. This is not a part where we can analyze. It's a part to feel and be present with. And every time we analyze, we are never present, because analysis kind of always involves to either be in the future or go back to the past to make sense of things. And while that is super important, it's not really conducive to what we are trying to go through here in this story, or in ourselves, if this is something we are going through right now. To be raped into the underworld is not the only mode of experiencing it. There are many other modes of descent. But when it comes in this radical fashion that we may know, which Mythame has encased us, we are dragged into Hades' chariot only if we are out in Demeter's green fields, seductively innocent with playmates among flowers. That world has to open up. When the bottom falls out, we feel only the black abyss of despair, but this is not only the only way to experience even this myth theme. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this word. Myth theme? But I think this is also what I've been talking about before, that if we are not creating active ritual in our lives to go through these processes, best believe that you will be forced to go to the underworld in some way or another by the things coming into your life. And this is especially prominent during eclipse season, because eclipse season tend to eclipse things into our life or out of our life. It's a season of major beginnings and endings. So this is really the part where I'm like, if you're not doing it, the eclipses can easily come and you will feel like you're forced to enter this void and go into the underworld. But if you are quite aware, it can easily happen through you building the ritual. But let's continue. For instance, Hecate was supposedly standing by the whole time, listening or watching. There is evidently a perspective that can witness the soul's struggles without the flap or Persephone or the disaster of Demeter. In us is also a dark angel. Hecate was also called Angelos, a consciousness, and she was also called Phosphoros, that shines in the dark and that witnesses such events because it already is aware of them a priori. This part has an a priori connection with the underworld through sniffling dogs and bitchery, dark moons, ghosts, garbage, and poisons. Part of us is not dragged down, but always lives there. As Hecate is partly an underworld goddess, from this vantage point we may observe our own catastrophes with a dark wisdom that expects little else. I really enjoy this part because it's really like, how often does something happen in your life and you feel this buildup? Like intuitively, you feel this buildup and you know this is something I have to go through. And there's some part of ourselves, which again in this story would describe Hecate, that knows how important this is and that kind of feels like, I know what awaits me, and yet I still have to go through this experience myself. It's almost like also a protective part, but in a different way, where it's just a witness. And witnesses are always so important because often when we are going through the underworld, we feel like we are going through this journey alone, but it's like, no, there's so much help. So many spiritual beings, angels in whatever way are here to help us go through this journey. We sometimes just tend to be a bit blind to them, but really, trust me, there's always so much help and love along the way if you are going through this underworld journey. And I think one of the great realizations of going through that eventually is the realization that you have never been alone and that you never will be alone, that there is always a force guiding you. And I think this is really when it kind of twists and turns and it becomes like this beautiful journey. And I think this is also a part where Persephone really embraces her role of being the queen of the underworld. We kind of learn to fall in love with the underworld, and this is where the strength then starts coming from. And then there's a brief part I'm going to skip just because it's not super important. But let's get to the last part because I think it's super interesting. And it goes a bit more into dreams here, actually. Furthermore, to place dreams with the chthonic underworld does not assume that dreams may not refer to gods other than Night and her brood. We know, for instance, that it is to Hermes that one turns for dreams, indicating that they could be sent through him from any of the gods, since he carried their messages. Many gods and heroes have chthonic aspects and epithets, so that we may descend through many archetypal styles, not only as does Persephone. That Hermes brought dreams and that Hermes is the sole way to Hades, as that same Homeric hymn states, leads us back to the same topos. For even if the activity of dreaming refers to Hermes, it is this god's chthonic aspect from which comes the dream activity. So it's really interesting here. It seems like a lot of ways in which we can actually access this realm is through our dream world. Dreams themselves are neither gods nor even messages from the gods except as transmitted through Hermes, whose peculiarly twisted ways are as unfathomable and deceptive as the psyche's depths. That dreams come via Hermes may help us to keep from divinizing them in psychotherapy, or taking them as divinations, or believing that by brilliant interpretations we can outwit the god after whom is named both their hermetic closedness and their hermeneutics by which we would reveal them. I love this last part so much because, again, as you can see, he's being a bit provocative here. And he's like, okay, well, Hermes kind of belongs to the dream realm. And I know we often associate Neptune in the dream realm, and that makes sense too. But Neptune, once again, is like probably the most deceptive planet out of all of them. And so I think it really poses the question here of like, is it smart to analyze our dreams in this daytime world? Because dreams maybe don't even have the meanings that we associate with them. And if we go through dream books and are like, oh, what does this symbol mean? Or what does this person mean? It doesn't have to mean these things. There's so many other things that can have meaning, and so many times it's just a way we are processing things and going through things. And everybody that has been that has actually analyzed their dreams for a while, and I have analyzed my dream for about 1.5 years and written them down all the time. And I have vivid dreams all the time, and it's really through my dreams that I process a lot of things. And there is a difference. I can very much easily tell if my dreams have just been processes of things that came during the day and my brain is somehow comprehending them in the dream world, or if it's like a deeper dream that actually has some sort of deeper meaning. But even there, I can promise you, you probably intuitively know better what it is upon just waking up than whatever is coming up from this deep analytical session of being like, okay, what exactly does this symbolize? Because oftentimes things can have different psychological and symbolic meanings to us than like a snake can have so many different meanings, especially in your personal life. Maybe a snake symbolizes something completely different than it symbolizes for me. And even if people show up in our dreams, oftentimes they are personifications of something completely different. It doesn't mean that this person actually is the actual person that we know in our real life. It might be something completely different in our dream symbolic realm. And the question here is again, do we have to know? Is our life more comprehensible if we actually go and analyze these things? And after deeply analyzing my dreams after 1.5 years, I must say, no, I don't think so. The less I analyze my dreams and just let them be whatever they are, I feel so much better by just accepting that this is somewhere my soul goes into the underworld and processes things, and it doesn't have to be that deep. I live my life so much better in this way. And so I think what we are learning here with the Virgo Lunar Eclipse is really to kind of stay away from this over-analytical aspects in our own lives of having to know everything. Maybe we don't have to know everything. Maybe our dreams can just be dreams and we don't have to deeply analyze them for them to make sense. Maybe we just need to let dreams be dreams and let them do its thing. Maybe we just have to let the underworld be the underworld. And maybe we just have to also put both of these aspects of Persephone in ourselves together and just accept that there are a lot of parts in ourselves that are very opposing, and that it's a good thing that we too can be the queen of the underworld, or also the beautiful embodiment of spring and pure nature. And I think this is especially the lesson for Virgo or Virgo placements in our charts, especially if this eclipse is hitting some certain placements in Virgo in your chart, is really asking the question, do I need to analyze and constantly fix things and try to reach some sort of balance? Or can I get further in embracing that I can be both? And that this is okay and that this is part of me. Virgo really is a lot of the archetype of teacher by day, stripper by night type of thing. And I think when Virgo really alchemizes both of these parts and is like, I can do both, and I'm still a normal human if I do both, then Virgo gets really, really far in life. And with this, I think it's good to end this video, slowly come to an end with everything. If you have watched until here, please leave me a comment. How have you been interpreting the story, Myth of Persephone of Ishtar Inanna in your life? Do you have any Virgo placements in your chart that are currently being activated by this eclipse? And just how are you currently feeling? Personally, again, I have really been in touch with the priestess archetype and going through my own underworld journey, really honoring Venus. I have a Venus altar currently set up, which I have posted on my Instagram. If you want to see how my Venus altar looks, go over and head to my Instagram. And just really honoring the goddess, and again, creating kind of this space where I can metaphorically go through the underworld journey myself, so it doesn't get forced upon me. And I've also really been grappling at certain things in my life that kind of stripped me from my innocence at a very young age, and who I became through that, and how I can use this too soon initiation to the underworld as something where I can take my power and kind of become the queen of the underworld myself in this regard. So what has been going on in your life? And if you found this video useful and helpful, please leave a like. It means more than you know. Share this video with anyone you think might find it useful. If you want to stay in touch on social media, on Instagram, Reddit, wherever, on my website, you want to book a reading, all the links are down below in the description. And yeah, otherwise, stay tuned for other videos. I do weekly overviews. I definitely plan on doing more such videos. It just often is something that happens more intuitively, but there's a lot of things I want to say. And there's definitely also a lot of things and stories that I want to share more on the spiritually developmental side. And I definitely also want to incorporate more Eastern spiritual beliefs, because I grew up in a yoga tradition linked to Tantra, which again completely different here in the Western world how Tantra is treated. And I think there's a lot of things that I just have to say and some wisdom I can share here and give you. So there's definitely also some of the more spiritually developmental sides that I want to incorporate in my videos as well, and kind of make my channel and the astrology and all of that a bit more unique and to my gusto, and hopefully also your gusto. So if that is something you are vibing with, subscribe to the channel to stay updated for my future uploads, and I will be seeing you very soon. And with this, goodbye, have a lovely day.